Can you pledge allegiance by phone too? Let's do the pledge of allegiance.
Cool.
If I don't know whether I do or don't.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Pothier.
Urken.
Cote. Bill Beard.
Richard Fridena.
Chris Cole.
Levoy, Hurley.
Jeff Rogers.
Brad Nelson.
Barbara Tellman.
And by phone.
Ryan Bickel. Okay, there's nobody waiting in the public to call the call. Chairman's report. Brian, do you want to report anything?
No, I did a follow-up letter to the Secretary of State. I haven't heard anything back yet. It was mailed, it'll be 2 weeks ago next Monday. Brad, I'm assuming it had come back to the Elections Department since that where it's sent from, and to the best of my knowledge, that hasn't happened yet.
On a totally unrelated subject, Brian, can you hear me? By the way, this is Brad.
Yes.
Okay. On a totally unrelated subject, I was up at the Secretary of State's office and had the occasion to chat for a while with Bo Dull, the new state elections director. She was not aware of the letter. Certainly, I understand that the letter was addressed to Secretary Hobbs, but for what it's worth, she was not yet aware of it, though she is eager to come down and speak with us.
And I spoke with the secretary at an event last week, and she said she definitely wanted to meet with us, that she would be coming down on a routine basis to each county. She's already hit 6 counties, but that she would set up a special meeting with us, either come to our meeting or we would accommodate to her time. We didn't set up a specific date.
Okay, good.
Mr. Chairman, Levoy here. Would you care to give us a little more update on that letter?
Didn't we all get a copy of it? I thought I got a copy of it.
Brian,
Yes.
would you care to give us a little more update on that letter?
I don't know that there's any more of an update to give. I mean, it was sent. I haven't heard anything.
Was that the same letter we reviewed?
Content. I'm sorry?
Was that the same letter we reviewed?
It's the one that got, I assume it's the one that got sent out to everybody.
Pass that around. Take one, please. I asked this, just for FYI, I asked this to be put on the agenda. The vice chair declined and stated that since it was in the chairman's report, we'd be reviewing it right here. Is that correct?
No, what I said was the letter had already been sent and it would be covered during the
Good.
chairman's report.
Okay, fine. Well, we're covering it right here. Please take one and pass it along. Please don't flip through the pages yet. Wish you had it. Unfortunately, Brian, you don't have a copy, but we can talk you through
We
this.
can make an airplane.
There should be plenty there. Here, the next one. I'm passing out a 3-page packet here, Brian. Unfortunately, you don't have it. I didn't realize you were going to be here, but I did send a copy to Brian, or to Brad, so trying to get it to you. First page is the letter we reviewed last meeting. Everybody recognize that? Pardon me for the shitty copy there. That's the letter we reviewed. I direct your attention to 3 bullets for action items there, or for discussion items. Look at the second page. The second page is the letter that went out under the chairman's signature. There are 4 bullets of topics on this letter. This is not the letter we reviewed last month. Mr. Bickel, would you care to explain this?
To the extent that I can, I don't know who sent the letters out. Certainly I did. I sent both letters. The first, if you're talking about and again, not having a copy in front of me, I don't know the date on the first letter with 3 bullets, the date on the second letter with 4 bullets, but one of them was sent to the secretary probably 2 months ago, and one of them was sent to the secretary 2 weeks ago. What got sent and when it got sent to the membership is something that I had no control over.
Well, we have some control, Brian. We reviewed the letter last month and agreed to the letter to send out to Secretary of State. That is not the letter that was sent. Is anybody, am I wrong? Anybody disagree here?
No. No.
So
Brian, it looks like you added something to the letter that we talked about and agreed to. This is Chris Cole. And we didn't agree to the addition.
Tell them what the addition is.
The addition, Brian, is you made an accusation. Basically, you said, we want to talk about voter suppression activities in the legislature. Did you add that bullet?
Well, if it's on there, I added it, sure.
By what authority did you decide to change the letter and send it out under signature, which basically is under my signature, a letter that I obviously would not have approved? What gives you the authority to do that?
Well, if you've got a concern with it, obviously, I did something that I thought was done at the request of the board, and obviously it wasn't. I would say that from my perspective, since neither letter has been responded to or acknowledged by the secretary, I don't know that either one has been received by the secretary. So, you know, if I did something that you found offensive, I certainly apologize for that, and certainly it won't happen again. I would say, for future reference, if you're concerned about the contents of the letter, then formulate the letter and have it sent.
Well, you already sent the letter, and I can tell you right now, there at least, I certainly would not have agreed to that fourth bullet on there. And I know two other members that would not have agreed to at least, that would not have agreed to that fourth bullet. I really don't get it, Brian. What in the world possessed you to do to put that in there? You had to know that that was controversial. You had to know that it would not have been agreed to by some of the members on this board. I just don't get it.
My mistake, and you know, if you'd like my resignation, I'd be happy to do that. It doesn't make me that much difference.
Well, we've done, just to close this out, you don't have a copy, but myself and the Republican members, myself, John Cote, and Bill Beard, acting as individuals, sent a letter to the Secretary of State, basically disavowing our participation in this letter, and sent her copies of it. I don't know if it's been received, whatever, but that we just, you know, we just felt we could not go along with this. Sorry.
Well, and I understand your position, Levoy, and I hope your letter gets to the Secretary of State, because obviously mine haven't.
It's probably the same round file yours is in.
If I could, Brian, this is Bill. One of the things in my time on this commission that has been hammered into me by other members of the commission, both current and former, is that when you are out speaking in the public, communicating in the public, whatever, you need to disavow any relationship to the commission other than the fact that you are an individual and your opinions are your opinions solely, unless you are specifically authorized by the commission to speak on behalf of the commission. And I think the concern here is that one thing was discussed last month at the meeting. Some changes were made at whoever's behest, and at this point I don't think it matters because the letter has gone out. The problem is, if we're going to be consistent, you can't have it the standard one way for one individual on the committee and a different standard for everybody else. It doesn't work that way. That's not how these commissions are supposed to operate. And individuals, when they go out and are communicating in the public, be it through email, letters, on radio, television, whatever, they cannot be speaking on behalf of the commission unless the commission has authorized those individuals to do so.
I understand that, Bill, and for future reference, I will not generate any correspondence to anybody anywhere except at the meeting. It'll be signed and given to Michael to be distributed at the meeting. If that creates time limit issues, so be it, it creates timeliness issues.
I have a question about the
But I
letter.
don't want to discuss something at the meeting and be given direction to do something, do it, and find out that a change that I made that may or may not have agreed with the rest of the commission causes a problem. So for future reference, from this day forward, as far as I'm concerned, anything that's going to be sent out on behalf of the commission will be generated, signed, and sent from the meeting. And if it takes 6 months instead of 6 weeks, it takes 6 months instead of 6 weeks. But this is the second time I've been crucified for it, and it ain't going to happen again.
I have a question about the letter that the three of you sent. Did you disavow the whole invitation, or did
No,
you
we
disavow?
did not. We were careful not to do that.
Do we have a copy of, did you sign it
It's-
as members of the commission?
No, we signed it as individuals.
Oh,
As individuals, we did put on there, it's on the last sheet there, Barbara.
yeah, I see what you have a copy.
No, we were careful not to disavow, not to disinvite her,
Okay.
and made it clear that it was the undersigned only that was sending that letter.
Any more discussion?
I'd like to say just a couple of words. This is John Cote. When I joined this group a year ago, I was hopeful that we could do most things in a bipartisan manner. And I've tried to do that, and tried to bring my own, even though I represent the Republican Party in this appointment, tried to bring my independent thoughts to the board commission. And I just hate to see things like this get started, because there's no end of it, particularly with the political discourse that's in this country right now. So with that, your apology is accepted, Mr. Bickel. But, and I look forward to us all working in a renewed spirit of bipartisanship.
Quad partisanship.
Quad partisanship.
Say that 3 times.
And I apologize for forgetting about this nice gentleman from the Greens has got on a nice pink shirt today. Should be wearing a green shirt.
And I should be wearing a purple, but anyway.
Okay,
Yeah.
shall we move, let's move on. Proposed legislative changes, are there any voters'
Can I-
impression? Legislative.
Barbara, can I make a point?
Yeah,
I didn't have an opportunity to be involved in these discussions, but now that this is coming out again, this sort of problem, I think it might be an opportunity to think about an alternative so that if we have our own charter, our own goals about the sort of things we're trying to achieve as a commission in elections, it could involve some of these issues that don't have to be articulated at every meeting or every once in a while, but these are what we are trying to do as a group. So that if somebody comes to talk to us, whether it's from the county or whether it's in the state or whatever, we have these statements as a guide about what we're trying to do. And it can be fairly general. I think, for example, that voter suppression is, you don't hear people coming out and say, I want to suppress voters, right? I think we could talk about that issue in a way that is nonpartisan, not bipartisan or tripartisan, is nonpartisan. That we have these goals that we're trying to implement in everything we do. And I realize that may be controversial, but it may be something we should discuss in the future to avoid these sorts of issues.
so we'll put that on the agenda for next time?
Yes, please.
Okay, can we move on to legislative issues and possibility of voter suppression legislation?
So long as we also talk about Barbara.
think they're
I will deal strictly with the legislative changes
Voter
that are,
signatures and things like that.
I will deal strictly with what's before the legislature.
Thank you.
And I apologize, I did send it to Michael, but apparently he was out when it was sent to him, and we tried to make copies. I will pass this around here momentarily, just for a quick review by everybody. There have been 1, 2, 3, 4 4 bills that have been signed by the governor. The tampering with political signs, that was HB 2023. Let's see, HB 2721, that was the term limits for elected officials in municipalities. The SB 1054, that was the deficiencies, the cure period for early ballots. The Ugenti Rita bill, that was signed by the governor, and SB 1072, the early vote center ID required bill, again from Ugenti Rita, that's been signed by the governor. A 5th bill, SB 1090, the emergency voting procedures, has been transmitted to the governor, but as of Tuesday, it had not been signed. I don't know if you've...
I believe that did get
That
signed,
did get signed, okay.
about 48 hours ago.
Yeah, there are a number of bills that have made it through the one house and are over in the other, and we're kind of at the period, those of you that are familiar with the legislature, where if something happens now, okay, but most things won't happen until they get done arguing about the budget. So whenever the legislature and the governor are on the same page, sometime between now and hopefully the end of the fiscal year, the legislature will sign a DIE, but that's where things stand as of right now.
Thank you. Any questions?
I have a comment,
Comments?
and I'm sorry, Bill, I don't have the bill in front of me, but it is from Ms. Townsend, and she has a bill that basically requires the Secretary of State to get a procedures manual out
Yes.
by October 1st of all odd-numbered years. I don't believe that's gone through the final phases, and it's
It's kind of in that holding
but
pattern.
I think it's on its way, so we will have a definitive date for all Secretary of States, present and future, that they need to have a procedures manual by a certain date.
And everybody I've talked to up there about that specific idea, that, you know, I'm not gonna say come hell or high water, but something to be just short of that, everybody I talked to up there believes that will be signed by the end of this legislative session, again, whenever that happens to be.
And I did get a communication from the elections director asking about what they're doing on the procedures manual. And the response was they have a draft, they're working with elected officials, they will take it for public comment. It would give me a specific deadline, but they will be.
Did they give you a time frame?
No.
Okay.
But they said there will be a period, there will be a public meeting, and I asked to be on the list so that we would be notified whenever anything happened.
Forgive me, but we've heard that before.
Yeah.
Many times.
From many different secretaries of state.
Yeah, but that's the status as far as I can find it. Okay, anything more? Elections flowchart, long awaited.
Read and weep, or whatever I need to say, but it is a flow chart that specifically denotes what happens in elections, not within the reporter's office. It is as detailed as I think we can get, but as you review it, not just today, but in the future, and you have questions or comments or improvements or deletions, let us know.
Any comments? We did get it by email.
Two things. One, I thank you. This is a tremendous thing. Second is this posted anywhere on a website for the
No.
public to view?
Not at the current time. We wouldn't object to that by any stretch of the imagination. There's nothing secret here.
Right.
So what I'm probably going to do is maybe wait for another 30 or 40 days for this body perhaps to make any comments, and then I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be posted.
I think for those nerds that like to dive into those waters, fine, it would be a valuable asset. For most of the public, they're not going to care, but at least having the ability to point, go look on the website, here's the flow chart of how things are supposed to be. It would be
There's a
helpful.
lot of people, and I've run into a lot of them, that have no idea about how elections work. And having something like this on the website where I can go here, look at that, and then if you've got a question, I'll try and answer it.
This is 12 pages. This is as cumbersome as this may be for somebody in the public to try and digest. It beats the alternative of sending them to read the procedure.
Any thought,
Brad?
That's presuming they can stay awake the whole time.
Yeah, really.
Is there any thoughts about putting this on a bigger format, 12 by 16
Oh, by
or
17.
whatever the hell they are, big
4 by
size,
17.
so that it could, in a bigger box, and then saying this is page 1 and page 2 and so forth. Sometimes these larger charts, that's just an idea, it's a suggestion.
I'll see what can be done.
And then, if you would, I wish you would, give us one of your classic Brad rundowns of this, like we just visited your facility for the first time.
I
Because
am
I
not
know
going to
that
go
there's-
page by page. It's slow chart.
I know that at the last election period, Barbara would say that, we had a number of discussions about what goes on and this and that and the other. And there were very few of us that have been in there lately. And this would be good, I think, for the commission as a whole. A lot of the guys that have been around for a while have visions of a few years back, perhaps. Things have changed. And you yourself said you had to update it. It is updated. Maybe you could give us the Cooks, the famous Brad's tour Cooks for.
What has changed is that this was last drafted, I want to say in 2008 perhaps, and at that time we were still having scanners at the polls. We didn't have permanent early voting at that particular point in time, so much of the process has changed because of changes in statute and changes in technology. But other than that, the flow is pretty much the same as it always has been.
Yeah, I recall when John Moffett was here.
Yes.
He created a flow chart with you before. Is this a version of that?
This is that particular version, if we're recalling the same document, was both the recorders and the elections functions in one giant, to use Mr. Cote's, I mean, the thing was like reading hieroglyphics.
And it was on very big paper.
Oh, huge, yeah. With all kinds of donkeys and elephants for party representation. There's very much a visual thing to look at. So what this is the removal of the recorders functions as they may exist now, because I have no idea how they may exist now. But it is taking those elections functions from approximately 2008 and updating them to what we do now. That is what you have.
Okay.
I would point out there are indications where they interact with the recorder's office. That's still in here.
The one thing I see that to your credit, that's not in here, but maybe it would be nice to know. There is a lot of effort and time taken, as you know, by Mary and Ann, Lily, and every time, and that's between your office and the recorder's office, bundling and counting and bundling and counting and stacking and bundling and restacking and recounting and signing and so on and so forth. Just the counting procedures in the machine room are significant, and we have 2 observers in there all the time. I wish the public understood. I wish I better understood. I'm convinced it works, but I wish the public understood how much work is involved to make sure that a ballot doesn't get misplaced once it gets put in the system. I've said on several occasions, I'm convinced a ballot makes it to the building, the ballot gets counted, and I'm certain of that. I have some questions about other things, and I think I have a suggestion or two to maybe speed up things. But that whole process, if we could have some enumeration of that somehow, and I don't know how to tell you how to put it in this. I never was very good with making these flow charts. But if that could be, and that outlines, we have observers that come and observe your activities. They have no idea what's going on. You get too close, they're sort of distracted, so on and so forth.
If I'm following your train of thought, I think we will have something that perhaps addresses that. And that is, as you just alluded to, there are some very key people within my department, Mary and Ann being one of two of them, pardon me. They are writing down their processes that they do with the people in the early boardroom and the like, how you receive things, how you document what you receive, what do you do with an anomaly, things of that nature. So that's actually being written for the ladies and gentlemen who will be doing that work, but it potentially could come here as well.
I would love to see it, love to understand it. It probably would, my guess is I would not see anything too surprising on it, because I watched those ladies very carefully, they're all very careful. But for instance, we don't talk in here about hoping on how you get the ballots from the recorder, the mail-in ballots. This mostly deals with 15 to 20% of the ballots. And the big number is those damn mail-in numbers. That's 80% of the ballots. Now, so the action between you and the recorder is very, very precise. She wants to make sure she turned over everything to you, and you want to make sure you've received everything from her. And we go through that all the way through there, and it's good. I'm not criticizing it, it's just labor intensive. And maybe it would help when we're trying to explain to the public why it takes so damn long, pardon the French. Maybe that's not French anymore. But anyway, why it takes so long to count the ballots.
Going in the other direction for more detail, I remember a couple of years ago, there was someone from the county who was taking videos of the process, and they said they were going to put together some kind of a program for people to see how the process went. Maybe it was four years ago. But I thought that was a really good idea to simplify it so the average person can see it. And I have done that within the Democratic Party, and it's pretty impressive to people to see what goes on without going into all the minute details.
If we're remembering the same event, so to speak, I believe the communications department from the county was exploring that, not just on the election side of the equation, but the recorders as well. I have no idea what happened in that.
It'd be nice to see if we could initiate that again, because who's going to go on the website and read this new
Same number of people who watch the video are
The video, you know, it's got pictures.
Yeah, and I always, when talking with people about the elections, I always refer to the fact that they can go online and look at, you know, what we did this last election, and I think it was two back, I think, the previous two elections are stored online.
The video you're talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, well, certainly the video of the counting center is archived forever and a day.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah. And, I mean, you know, they can see just how much security we put into this.
Are there any other comments, questions? I thought there was someone
Well,
over here.
if you could, is today convenient to do the Cook's tour?
Nope. I'm not doing a tour.
You know what I'm saying.
It doesn't really work unless there's some ballots going through.
I'm sorry, say
It's
again.
not really very effective unless there are ballots being handled, you actually see it going on.
Well, it would be nice, that's another idea, of course, to this, would be to have a copy of a ballot and a sample. I don't think the general world knows how big the ballots are.
There are some jurisdictions across the United States who have, I'll call it a flow chart, that basically talks about the life of a ballot.
Right.
That basically, here's how your ballot gets generated, here's how the ballot gets presented to you, whether you're at a polling place or voting, and then once it's received, either by the poll workers or by the official who receives mail ballots, in other words, all the steps. So there is, in some other jurisdictions, kind of a sequence of a life of a ballot, so we'll look into that.
Okay, anybody else? Comments?
Well, I want to make one comment if we could. This doesn't obviously include the big elephant that's not in the room. How do we get the something similar to finish this off for mail-in ballots and what the recorder does. Could we write a nice letter requesting that from the recorder and Brad get together and do the rest of this?
But there is something on the recorder, number 3A and 3B and 3C.
I think John's referring to what are the procedures in terms of a flow chart on the recorder side. We can probably request it, but
That is,
Well, there is the flow chart there, it's not as detailed. But, you know, I think it's detailed enough for what most people are gonna be interested in.
well, I somewhat disagree with you. Maybe most people wouldn't be interested in this at all.
Oh, I will agree with you on that.
Anybody that is interested in this will want to know the other piece to it.
I believe the recorder did, not a detailed version of this, but when she gave her talk with her PowerPoint, and then we had copies of it, she did go into a number of the steps, but not in this next
Well,
one.
then it shouldn't be too easy, too hard, too difficult to put this in a format where we could complement this, so to speak, and this would complement what she has, and the election's integrity is sort of there for a flow of a ballot. That's what this is all about.
And of course, some of this might get changed within the procedures manual.
Sure. But could we request it? I'd like to make a motion that we request such a thing.
Is there a second?
second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Hey,
Let's see, we're gonna have to count these. Okay, how many ayes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And nays? 1. You sounded louder than that. Okay, we will request, we write a letter, we'll have Brian write a letter, and he will bring it back to the next meeting, and we will approve it, and if we approve it, it will be sent exactly as written.
So I may record this appropriately, was there 1 nay?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Doesn't, don't the bylaws require a vote by all members that you can't not vote?
Yes, it is.
Because there's only 6
Yeah, I guess
votes.
I didn't speak up when I was asking. Okay, I'll go for it.
I voted for it.
Well, I didn't do it, I understand.
Can't do
You
it.
can't
I
abstain.
don't think you can abstain by
Well,
bylaw.
you wanted to consult the rules and show me where that says that? I'd be glad to comply with the rules, but I think it was not so clear that people had a vote that you could abstain.
Shall we just accept this as an acceptable vote as is, the majority?
Yeah, I don't think it makes a practical difference.
Okay, Brian, you have a task. Are you still there? Brian?
I'm still here. What?
So we just approved writing a letter to the recorder asking for input into the flow chart from her department. So we will discuss that at the next meeting. Okay, what does election integrity look like?
So, just past my 1-year anniversary on this commission, frankly, a little frustrated. I'm not sure why I'm here. I'm not sure why we're here. We talk about a lot of things, look at a lot of different stuff, but we don't really talk about what elections integrity. We talk about voting machines, talk about flow charts, this kind of thing. But to partly to what Arnie, you were saying earlier, you know, the bigger, you talk about one of these points that we're supposed to be looking towards, okay? How do we know when we're done? Does anybody have a clue, you know, what is election integrity? You know, in my experience as a systems engineer, we start at the top, start with a broad definition of what the project is, the goals, it's a missile, it's going to hit another missile or something like this. We talk about the what's. dissect the what's into smaller what's, and like things like that. And eventually we get into the hows, and we're going to do it. So what I did here, and kind of throwing things out here, for discussion purposes, basically, we're not gonna solve this today. There's no, I hope this will be an ongoing discussion. Or if they want to continue it, that's fine too. I'll figure that out. So this is a very simple statement that I put together. So with the help of my other colleagues here too. I just wrote it very quick, almost like a mission statement. So I can throw this out for discussion. Enough out there? There should be enough going on that way. Sorry about that. Just kind of.
We gotta tighten this up.
Yeah, really.
I got it.
All right, should just hit
I
record.
need
Can
the
you read
exercise.
one for Brian?
Do you 2 or 3 or?
Okay.
Wait a minute, Brian, he's gonna read one for Brian.
Do you
Brian,
need
can you
one,
hear me? This is
Barbara?
Brad. I'm standing fairly close to the phone.
Anybody else?
I can hear you.
Okay. This is a proposed, if I may say
Yeah,
that,
please.
definition of election integrity. Quote, every legally cast vote, comma, and only those votes, comma, are cast, comma, tabulated, comma, and reported in an efficient and timely manner, period. Continuing. Any recounts are conducted in a precise, comma, systematic manner in full accordance with established recount rules, comma, and results are reported in a timely manner, period, close quote.
I didn't try to wordsmith or refine this. In fact, actually, to tell you the truth, this kind of came to me. I was out working in my car doing an oil change, and it kind of popped into my head. So I tried to throw it out there for discussion.
You want to take questions? And
Absolutely, it's discussion.
I just want to suggest that you're, as a systems engineer, you're starting at the wrong place.
Okay.
Because the voting process is a way of expressing.
Stop right there, please.
Sure.
We're not talking about voting, and that's the problem we've had here. We're talking about elections.
Okay, well, you can, voting,
There's a difference, and I want to be clear about.
well, yes and no. I mean, you can't have an election without the voting process of some sort. So I think in order to have any notion of integrity or reliability, you have to understand the information that's being communicated and processed, right?
Right.
So in that sense, I think you can't ignore the proper starting point. And in fact, this is not just a theoretical academic issue. Although we haven't discussed it sufficiently here, part of the distrust and dissatisfaction with election processes around the country, in fact the world, is that the systems that are used to express information about people's choices is not adequate. It distorts what people really think. It misses what people really are concerned about. So, for example, for whatever reason, in this context, we always assume that people have one vote to cast, and they can cast for one of the 3 or 4 or umpteen parties that might exist at any one point. For many people who are concerned practically and theoretically about integrity, that's unreasonable, because it doesn't allow people, for example, who are independents or libertarians or other people, to participate in the process. Even in the United States, we have blanket primaries, and there's an open primary movement by the Independent Voters Organization nationally to make sure that all parties open up their primary process to allow any voter to take part. I'm not going to talk about how the vote is actually cast, but they can take part and vote. Since I pay for that election, I should have some say in what happens there. If the party doesn't want to have me participate, then they shouldn't ask me to pay for it. They should go and have a caucus or a convention, and then bring their candidates to the the election process to be voted on by everybody else. So that there are a lot of these issues that involve what the starting point is, that you really can't ignore by saying, well, we're talking about elections, not voting. You have to talk about voting when you talk about elections.
Don't disagree at all, okay, but it is a bigger picture than voting. We talk about voting in this group here. And we
Well,
talk
yes
about
and no.
we talk about a very small microcosm of the voting. We talk about basically what happens in Brad's office, basically. That's what we talk about, okay? what we talk about.
That's not true. In fact, if you go back historically,
Right.
we've had very different views about what this process should look like, right? Including the idea that
One perspective.
each individual's vote should belong to them, that the sharing of that information, as it's conventionally done, is out of order, that the recorder should not give away my information about whether I'm registered, where I live, anything like that, without my explicit permission. In other countries in the world, for example, and following the lead of Scotland, voters can opt out of that sharing process. They have to explicitly give consent. And there have been judicial and other decisions backing that up. So if you go back to that point, the data, it has to be specified what we're trying to do here. And what is the proper way of collecting, storing, and distributing that information. So I think we can't ignore that. I'm sorry. go ahead.
I would add a third paragraph. Any proposition, any proposition brought to the public must be written in a clear, explicit, and unambiguous manner so that the voters, when they vote on that, know what they're doing.
I think partly what Arnie was saying at the beginning, that what you went into later, was that we need to go broader than every legally cast vote. The question is who has the legal right to cast a vote and who determines that. So I think it's probably bigger than what this says.
Yeah,
Well,
I
that's bigger.
agree that we're not gonna,
Yeah, your points are well taken. You're down several layers below where I'm trying to start, okay?
or up several layers, I don't know if this is done.
No.
As a systems engineer, I would say up.
For software.
This isn't,
Yeah.
A couple of thoughts. I can agree with both folks talking here, even Chris here. The reality, though, is this Election Integrity Commission has to deal in the universe of the laws in the state of Arizona. That's where we need to focus our discussion about election integrity on. We, as individuals or as a commission, have marginal, and even that's dubious, ability to affect what those laws are as currently constructed. We can urge, we can lobby, we can do whatever, either as a group or individuals, but in terms of the integrity of the process, we have to be dealing with the now rather than the possible in the future, as the majority of our conversation. That's the reality of the situation. In that universe, there are some things that I think, to your point, we can have some agreement on so that when the public is either the 2 or 3 people that actually view it on a semi-occasional basis, or we are out talking in the public about this, when we talk about election integrity, this is what it means. Because I don't know about the rest of you, but occasionally I get asked that question about, what does election integrity mean in Pima County? You sit on this commission, what does that mean? Well, I have my thoughts on the matter, and I share those with people when they ask, but I think it does go directly to, why the hell are we here? And part of that is that idea of, do we actually have a shared opinion about what the integrity of elections are in Pima County and as a byproduct, the state of Arizona. And, yeah, there's always going to be differences on the margins, but here's the meat that 90+% we agree on when it comes to meeting election integrity.
So what would you think the 90% is?
This is a good point, you know, Chris had a point about adding some additional. I don't think we need to get too far down in the weeds, but having something that, yeah, this is what election integrity actually means, and, you know, discussions proceed from there.
Well, and to add, I'm sorry Chris stepped out. How deep do you go in the weeds? If I wrote down what Chris said, not most of it anyway, and he said any proposition brought before the public must be written in a clear, concise manner. I believe that's exactly what he said, that trailed off. Do we add to that, any candidate running for office shall also state his views in a clear and concise, and his platform in a clear and concise manner?
Look with that one.
Yeah, no, I'm realizing the humor of what I'm saying as I mean, how deep in the woods does it go? Because what we're tasked with, if there's a task, is something rather vague. And, you know, and at what point do you say, well, the voter has to pony up, he has to be an eligible voter, and how deep do you go with that? You have to say that the authority that this is being written in, whether it's the city of Tucson or the city of Marana, or the Vale School Board or the Tucson Unified School District, or a member of that if they're casting a vote, how deep do you go? Start pulling up the components of a cast vote.
Ryan, do you have your hand raised and want to say anything? Ryan, wake up.
Oh, I'm still here. It takes me a while to get the phone unmuted. You know, I think, and part of the frustration that I feel with the role of the commission, if you go back to the historical establishment of the commission in July of 2008, it was an entity established quite loosely and quite ill-defined by the Board of Supervisors and answers in an advisory capacity to the Board of Supervisors. I find it ironic that the primary focus for some members is in the purview of another elected official over which the Board of Supervisors have absolutely no control. So, while they may be part of the election process, if you look at the establishment of this commission solely from the point of its establishment, then as frustrating as it may be, the recorder's going to do what the recorder's going to do, and there's nothing that the commission or the Board of Supervisors is going to do to change that perspective. When you start getting down into the weeds as far as what a candidate will or won't do or will say or won't say, you have absolutely no control over what a candidate does, to the point where the party may get frustrated from what a candidate does or doesn't do, but they have no control over an individual candidate. So I think if you want to go back to the original charter of the commission and why we were established, it was because there were real or perceived inappropriate behavior in the 2006 bond election that were to be addressed on a number of fronts. And if you want to get out of the purview of the Board of Supervisors and the Elections Department, then you need to convince the recorder that she's going to be a part of the charter of this commission. And if she chooses not to do that, then she chooses not to do that. And as frustrating as it may be, it can be frustrating. But the fact of the matter is, there's nothing we can do about that. You know, our charter is with the Board of Supervisors and what the Board of Supervisors has control over. And what the Board of Supervisors has control over is the Department of Elections. So when you get outside of the Department of Elections, those departments may or may not participate as they see fit. And if they see fit not to participate, then they don't participate. And if it's frustrating enough for you, then you either deal with the frustration or you decide that participating in the commission is a waste of your time and efforts and there's nothing to be accomplished. So, I don't mind corresponding with the recorder, but if the recorder says go pound sand, well, then we're going to go pound sand. Unless you're willing as an individual or the commission to take recourse in the courts, I don't think you've got a leg to stand on. It's obvious to me that one of the focuses of Arnie is the dissemination of information collected on individual voters. And the elections department doesn't have anything to do with that. That's the county recorder's purview. And we have, in no way, shape, or form, any control over what the county recorder does. Not as the Election Integrity Commission. Not by the way we were established by the Board of Supervisors. So, if you want to try and control the county recorder, then control the county recorder as an individual. If you would like to ask the recorder to participate in the process, I don't have a problem asking, but when she says no, then she says no.
Hey, Bill?
Directly to that point, all well and good what you said, Brian. There's one little thorn sticking in all of that. We have a mission statement that talks about election integrity and the voter trust in elections in general in Pima County. What goes on in the recorder's office has a direct impact on both of those things. So my suggestion is, in light of what you just said, we either change our mission statement or we go along with members being frustrated, be they Arnie, myself, you, anybody, about what we can and can't do with the other members of the election officials in Pima County, or we, as a group, decide we're wasting our time, we vote to disband.
It seems to me, I have a question here for you, Levoy. Are you trying to sort of academically define election integrity, or are you trying to narrow down what the purpose of the commission is?
Yes and yes. Okay, because in to Brian's point, a couple things, Brian's point. Fact of the matter is we can't do a damn thing about anything. Okay? We have no authority. And as far as being subordinate to the board, which we are, when was the last time we had any communication with the board?
Well, individually, people talk to members of the board, but not as a group.
That's right.
Wait, no, we sent a letter a couple of months ago about my idea for the
We
commission.
did, you're right.
Their response was basically, do it on your own time.
Okay.
Am I wrong?
Wait, now, Kristen, you have something?
Well, my impression of the formation of this commission is that the Board of Supervisors wanted to cover their rear ends because of the 2006 RTA bond election. And we make recommendations, not as often perhaps as we should, but we make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. That's our job, to make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors primarily regarding the election department. And insofar as we do anything outside of that, it's supplemental to that. It's, okay, we're making a report to the Board of Supervisors, but we're also reporting to the population in general. We're suggesting something with the election department, but we're also suggesting something that the Board of Supervisors may want to do. As for example, the, what was it, the 15 bond election audit. So, and we won. The Board of Supervisors, in spite of dragging their feet, says, okay, yeah, we'll have the audit. So we cannot actively do something We're not a legislative body. We're an advisory body. But we can get stuff done.
Okay, Artie?
Just a comment, I wasn't necessarily talking about the origin of the data in the recorder's office. That's not perhaps the most important point for John's definition. What I do see as an issue is that I don't have confidence reading your statement that we have a system that's full of integrity. Because like many other things, it's easier to know when the system is not working than it is to know it's working. So with respect to elections, I would suggest that steering clear of the recorder's office and everything, and your definition, I would like to suggest that as an individual voter, I would feel more confident if I knew my vote was actually not only received, but counted properly. So by analogy with banking, when I deposit money in a bank, I get redundant communication that not only has it been received, but it's been deposited and counted correctly. I get a chance to verify that myself. I don't have to trust anybody. So it seems to me as a fundamental principle of systems in elections, I ought to be able to verify that my vote is processed correctly. I don't want to have to trust you or machine or anything else. I want to be able to actively verify it for myself. And that seems to be a relatively simple thing to do. It's not in conflict with any state law. It's not in conflict with, well, I mean, I'd like to hear a discussion about it.
Okay, Steve has.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I keep hearing aspects of this that are, where should we put our effort in terms of getting results? And so at one end of the spectrum, it's, oh, we really can't force anything to happen, so we have no control, so why bother? And that's kind of the worst end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum might be, hey, we're not directly involved in making any changes. The best we can do is communication. A couple of things Chris said I thought kind of helped to focus within that spectrum better. The idea that, oh, we're here to make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, and that we only do our work via advisory capacity. I think it sort of focuses what we do or don't try to do. If we agree on those things, then there's certainly some things we talk about that we're like, nope, that doesn't yield a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors, so it's not in our job jar. So I am interested in trying to get a better idea of what we should be doing, because I also feel very frustrated about what are we doing here.
Okay, so I mean, to Arnie's point, good points. But you talked about, again, back to voting, okay? And that's fine. We want to call ourselves, maybe we talk about this name change. Maybe we're the Voting Integrity Commission for Pima County. But we're certainly at that, using that scope, not the elections commission. And I'm okay with that. If we want to make something, do something like that, I'm fine with that. Because there are pieces of the election process that we never talk about, like voter registration database that we have out there, sitting out there. It's not our purview, but if you don't have a valid voter registration database, you don't have voter integrity. Elections integrity.
It's a big issue.
It's a huge issue, okay? It's a huge issue. If we want to narrow our scope down to Pima County voting, I'm okay with that. Let's just admit it and move on.
Okay, John?
Well, I have a couple of points. I just want to point out one more time, Ernie, I don't think you were here the last time, but you probably watched it on the video, that we have 554,000 roughly registered voters in the county. 4,000 roughly of them voted the last go round. 80% of the vote that gets processed before we get here. I think that's the big elephant in the room that we have to talk about. Now, yes, we do report only to the Board of Supervisors. Yes, the charter doesn't give us any wherewithal with the recorder. I respect the recorder and I respect her independence, and there was a time when the county was smaller and things were done more by hand and this, that, and the other, and everybody that voted might have known who voted and who didn't. To Arnie's question about he'd like to know he was voted, I'd say, yeah, that's great. I'd like to know how that my votes were voted like I wanted them to be voted to. But there is probably an issue of confidentiality there, because we're supposed to be able, my wife's supposed to be able to vote the opposite of the way I vote most of the time if she wants to. And the mail comes to me that says you voted, or I can get on the website, so on and so forth. How do you make it secure?
Hey, Chris?
Okay, when I cannot remember who else, went to the recorder's office and examined what she did, one of the things she showed us was there is in the database, there's a secure database that I voted. It did not show who I voted for or what I voted for. And I cannot see how that information can be provided without totally destroying voter privacy.
Agreed.
But the data that I voted in every election that I've been eligible to vote for since I've come back to Pima County was there in the database. And that data is accessible to the public. I don't remember the procedure for getting it, but you can find out, yes, my vote did get processed and counted. It's in the database, and it's, I think, during the actual election itself, it's on the recorder's website. So,
Just a question about your terminology. You started off, I followed you, and then you lost me, because you have no idea that it was counted. You have an idea that it was recorded.
the recorder's database shows that I voted.
Right.
And I couldn't say, to your point, I couldn't say that it merely showed that my vote was processed or that it was counted, because when they send the votes, when the votes go through the voting machine, there is no way of saying that this ballot is attached to this person, and so their ballot went through the voting machine. And I cannot see how you can do that without destroying voter privacy.
Well, that's something we should discuss, because,
I think this is really off the topic.
yeah, it's a technical question, and it is a solvable problem, but, you know.
So let's get back to the question of,
Brian?
Right.
Brian? Brian?
Yes, I'd like to comment on something that, a statement that John made, where he talks about, we're dealing with 20% of the ballots and 80% come from the recorders. Well, I understand the point he's trying to make. From an elections perspective, we're dealing with 100% of the ballots. 80% of them may come from the recorders and 20% may come from the polling place, but we deal with 100% of the ballots. And I certainly understand what Arnie is saying, but I would concur with Chris. If I have the opportunity to know that my vote was counted and it was counted the way I cast, and it means sacrificing the secrecy of the ballot, and that's where I concur with Chris, and absolutely. And if the paranoia is such that we're worried about the integrity of the registered voter database, putting information on actual vote results by individual voters, then from my perspective, perspective, that paranoia goes up 100-fold, but.
Yeah, we should talk about this another time.
I'd like to get away from this concept that we only deal with 20% of the ballots. No, the elections department deals with 100% of the ballots. It's just a matter of where the origination of that content comes from.
Thank you, Brian. So can we get back to the topic of,
So the question
is
becomes,
what does election integrity look like? And does that mean you want to define that part of the name of our commission?
I think it's important to decide what sphere is that, the old context diagram here. You know, are we going to talk about elections? Are we going to talk about voting in Pima County? Because it's a big difference. Big difference.
So are you suggesting that we either try to change the responsibility of the commission,
No.
or that we change the name?
I'm talking about acknowledge what we are here to do.
I think that's
And
pretty
everything I've
clear.
heard says we're here to deal with the voting in Pima County.
So would you want to,
Barbara,
yes, Brian?
to address the point that Levoy just made, and I think this is where the 80-20% split is critical. When you're talking about polling places and voting procedures, outside of the purview of the early voting process, that is very much under the purview of the Elections Integrity Commission. The early ballots and the way they're processed through the recorder's office isn't. So I think when you're talking about voting, there you've got an 80-20 split.
Okay, Bill?
If I could, Brad, you had the manual out earlier. Could you read what the mission statement of this organization is real quick?
Is the mission statement the same as function and purpose?
I believe so.
Maybe.
Close enough for now.
Close enough for government.
This is actually from the bylaws. I hope that is the appropriate
Yes.
place.
Yes.
That was what I was referring to.
This is Article 3, headlined by function and purpose. I begin. The Pima County Election Integrity Commission is chartered as an advisory group, reporting to the Pima County Board of Supervisors. The purpose is to help improve the conduct of elections by examining the systems and processes behind them in order to improve functioning of and public trust in the Pima County electoral process, period. End of statement.
And I think it's that last part where at least I've always interpreted, based on conversations I've had with a number of others, if you're talking about public faith and trust, you cannot reside, all of your questions cannot only reside in what goes on in the elections department, period.
No, but you have to work within the bounds of, if the Pima County recorder says, I'm not gonna talk to you.
I agree. But
we try.
questions can be legitimately asked and
Yes.
discussed.
Yes.
And there are things we can do without talking to the recorder. I mean, the question, how can I make sure my vote is counted properly? Not have to bother her about that. That's an election issue. It's a voting issue. And we've never really examined that. And I think that we should be aware that people in the United States and other countries are trying to build systems that enable people to trust elections to that extent. It's not an easy thing to do. It does involve giving up privacy. We can't discuss that now, but it's a mistake.
This is
To think
something
that
that
somehow
needs to
you
go
have
on the
to
next
give up your
agenda.
privacy to make sure that your vote is actually counted.
Bill?
I just want to add one thing. Every elected official that has any part of the elections process in the state of Arizona takes an oath to uphold all the laws. Part of that checks and balances is if the recorder sees that the elections department is doing something wrong, the recorder is to call the Board of Supervisors on it, and vice versa. If the Board of Supervisors members see that there's a problem in the recorder's office, they are to speak publicly and call the recorder on those activities. That's part of the system.
But
Civics
this is-
101.
This is a future agenda.
So the question here is, are we defining election integrity, or are we further refining what the commission does, or both?
Well, yeah, I mean, one follows the other.
Yeah. In my opinion, voting integrity is a subset of election integrity. And so we start at the level of, okay, can we say that there's integrity in the elections? If not, what needs to be done to improve the integrity? Then we can go to the voting. Then we can go to
The database.
the reporting of the reports. Was my ballot processed? How many ballots were spoiled? How many ballots, overvotes, undervotes, and so forth? All of the little technical minutia that are part of determining if there was integrity in the election and in the voting process. You know, this definition, with the suggestion I made, I think is a very good place to start. And we can go from this general to a more detailed, including as part of election integrity, is the equipment. Is there integrity in the equipment? I mean, we spent how many months going through all of the proposed voting machines before the county? Because that was part of election integrity, making sure that the voting machines were reliable and they had integrity.
Okay, so what,
Isn't minutia how election laws, attorneys make their bucks?
Levoy, do you have a proposal, specific proposal for
Well,
what to do now?
I think at this point, I'm gonna suggest a new one, basically, okay? I don't think we're gonna get this solved. I didn't intend for this to be solved. I said in the first place, we're gonna solve it here. We do need to decide, though, are we the vote tabulation integrity commission? That's what we've been dealing with here,
Well,
you know?
and to that point, if I may, maybe it's appropriate for a motion to be made, and this is just as a result of this discussion, that we again give our letter writer a task of writing the recorder and ask her if she would like to participate in this. I know we all know infamously or been told that she wants no part of this. But once again, maybe we should ask, and then maybe if that failing that, maybe we should make a recommendation to the supervisors that they in turn talk to her office to office and see if that can be resolved in some sort of a treaty, intergovernmental agreement, they call it.
Based on the reading of our mission, or function, and what Bill has to say, it seems that our target is not the county recorder, but it's the board of supervisors, in that we need to be communicating with them this issue that we may see with the recorder, and they're the ones that need to take it up, not us. It seems that we're misplacing our efforts, that we've identified a problem, but we're not the people that can solve it. What we are the people to advocate that the problem be addressed, and we need to shift from what we do, talking to the recorder, to having the county supervisors talk to the recorder, which is problematic, I understand.
What's the history of this commission on doing that? Sorry.
Okay, Artie?
Well, just to comment, historically, some people remember that the Board of Supervisors, at least the superintendent, actually was very supportive of the idea of investigating the re-engineering of the voting/election system, whatever you want to call it, and engage the university to start talking about it. And I quite naively thought that academic people would be informed and knowledgeable. They weren't, regardless of their political stripes. And so we didn't get very far. And the point is, the Board of Supervisors is not necessarily the problem here. They were open to talking about these issues and in fact trying to act on them. So they're not our enemy, they're a potential partner. In fact, they are our boss, in a sense.
Sometimes.
Right?
So to speak.
So I think we should rethink carefully what we want to try to do in communicating with them. Have a strategy in mind and some goals. Yeah.
I think you're approaching this with an antagonistic point of view.
Oh, I'm not.
I mean the general here, that we are antagonistic toward the recorder. In the past, we didn't have good relationships with the recorder. At one time, we met in the county building, and the recorder did come to the meetings and participated, and then there were some issues that arose, and the county recorder sort of separated.
It wasn't the county recorder, it was their assistant, Chris King.
Whatever.
Well, whatever makes a big difference.
The office of county recorder, put it that way. So then we were changed to being pretty much under the purview of the elections department. We were moved out of the county building, and I think that's where the split happened. It was quite some time ago. And we did have county people attending our meetings other than the elections department. And I think we can get back to this. The recorder, when she gave her presentation on the recorder's office several months ago, said she was willing to go talk to anybody anywhere, and I suggest that we invite her to come give her talk to us.
And I thought we did make a motion that we would write her and ask her that, or invite her, and
I don't know if we
wonder
did.
what the status of that might be.
But we could try that again. I think that would be a good way to start, because she does explain the process. And she's not a horrible person.
She's probably the best recorder in the entire state of Arizona.
So I think we should
She runs a
try to work friendly.
I'm not antagonistic, I want to make sure everybody understands, I'm not antagonistic about it. I just think we have a funny kind of a system of voting in this state. And one thing that, if you stop and think about it, what other business in the world other than in voting would you give someone the authority to register a vote, to put you on a list for a mail-in ballot, to send you a mail-in ballot, to check your signature on the mail-in ballot, and then to forward your vote in
Well,
without any outside parameters other than, I realize she has an oath of office, and I'm not at all throwing any bricks towards the window.
but in Maricopa County, they not only do all of that, they count the votes too.
Yes,
They do everything.
I understand.
That,
At least you have this division.
they're supposedly going to accomplish that by the end of the year.
Supposedly, this is what they used to do, right?
Yeah. And so they're talking about going to a system more like ours in Maricopa County because of all of the voting irregularities and
We
problems.
are
they've
off
had.
topic.
I don't have a question with our
We're
issue
getting
with that.
way off the topic.
We are way off, but I want to make sure the point I'm trying to make is there. We're supposed to have a balance and duties and responsibilities, checks, built-in checks. And it is awkward to me that all of this with the mail-in votes goes the way it goes. And it speaks to the database that, I don't know how you check that database ever.
And you're speaking to state law to a certain extent to federal
Oh,
law.
yeah.
Some of this is,
Oh, yeah, no
we have
question.
no responsibility.
No question, but it's, somebody said to me the other day, what you're saying, this thing is crazy. I think Bill said it to me. I said, no, crazy means that there were people that belong in an asylum somewhere. This thing is nuts. We're supposed to be reasonably educated, systematic people.
So the question is, what are we going to do about the role of this commission and what is election integrity within that role? And I'd like to see a specific proposal for what you want to see.
Continue that to the next meeting?
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think we need to decide, are we the vote tabulation integrity commission, or are we the elections integrity commission? And, or, also, what I've seen here, in here, and I know there's been some participation of the board, but in a lot of ways, it looks like we're here to provide cover for the board.
We are.
And if that's the case, then I'm not so sure that makes a lot of sense.
Well, if we're here to play, let me add to this pot, if we're here to play cover for the board, what happens when we get sued individually? Does the county take care of that?
Depends on what you're sued for.
That's off topic.
Yeah, way off topic.
Well, but it's, if we're here to play cover.
Let's continue this to the next one, I suggest.
We move on to the next
Yes.
item, which is proposed solution to processing delays.
Okay. Each of you should have gotten a note. This was basically going to be an update. I saw the agenda, and it seemed to me that what Brad had on there could be a lengthy discussion if he was going to make a presentation. Making an assumption that there would be a presentation. Knowing what else was on the agenda, having been aware of the dust up with the letter, I felt like we needed to calm things down and pull one less thing off. But let me give you an update. I sent around to everybody, and you should have received some articles about signatures, verification. I think it's important that we begin to think about this as a real part of our system. Particularly since we're moving more and more to mail-in balloting. There was a time when everybody went 5%, went and voted by mail, 95% voted by going down to the polls. Polls were smaller, people knew each other, had visual identification, friendship, so on and so forth. And when you voted, they knew who voted. Polls are getting bigger. We had 70,000 votes, 80,000 votes last year at the poll, last December, or last, let me get the date correct,
Can we move
November.
on? We think we have a lot of this data. Can we move on to the proposed?
So what I'd like to talk about is what you think about, what your thoughts are about this notion of beginning to look at the signatures on the mail-in ballots from a military grade, use that term loosely, processing. Yes, sir.
Can I suggest, with respect, that this is another technical question which should be addressed separate and apart from this meeting? Because Leroy raised the question of what the system should look like. And certainly one aspect of the system might be signature verification. But it's not clear in my mind that you've thought through how signature verification is going to improve the quality of processing, and whether speed is relevant. I mean, I could make an argument that our elections are too fast. They're not slow enough. That people should take time to be able to cast their vote and change their vote if they get new information. If you look historically at the reliability of decisions that are made collectively in different contexts, it's the ability of a group, however they do it, to reassess their decisions that's important. So I think we don't need to talk about signature verification. We need to talk about the criteria that we need to run an election. I'm not sure that this does that. Sorry, go ahead.
So, to your point about not thinking through, I think it's not fair to John. He's thought this thing through quite a lot. In fact, to the point about what it accomplishes, one very simple thing that it accomplishes is it takes the manual labor down from about 100% on this stuff to about 15-20%, in that the only manual labor that you would be doing is the processing of anything that got rejected by the automated systems. And you can't tell me that somebody sitting there in front of that screen for 8 hours a day, 10, whatever many hours a day,
is as effective in hour 7 as they were in hour 1. If you ever worked in a factory on a line putting in screws, whatever, you just completely get burnt out. I know guys that have done that for years. I tell you, their brains are a little wacky, let me tell you. But at that point, so he does.
But this is not a factory, this is an election process.
Well, it is a factory over there. I'm sorry, it is a factory. It is analogous to a factory in that there are very specific stations this runs through, very precise, according to the flow chart. That is analogous to a factory, okay? And now, if you've got guys sitting here, again, go back to these Bengals sitting there in front of that screen, I've watched them. I don't see how they do it that long. I really don't.
Chris?
The last election, and I forget how many hundreds or thousands of ballots had not been processed by the Saturday when we did the hand count on it. But something like this means it is going to be easier to meet the statutory deadlines for provisional and conditional ballots and early ballots and so forth. And that is to the good, because if we cannot meet the statutory deadlines, then candidates who want to raise questions are not going to have the necessary time to do so. And automatic verification of signatures, having the computer look at this signature and the signature that's on file, I think is a good idea. And I think it improves not only the speed of the election, which you may decide is not a good idea, but it also improves the integrity of the election because it reduces the number of mistakes that have to be dealt with.
If you heard Ann's presentation, she said that the main issue with the delay is counting the provisional ballots at the end afterwards.
Yeah.
And so I don't think,
But the thing of it is, the signature, automatically verifying the signature is going to speed that up. Because when I was there, it took about 5 minutes, I think, each signature.
but in provisional ballot processing, it's not just the signatures. it's
No, but the verifying the signature is a very large portion of the time required to process a provisional ballot.
Well, and let me to be clear. It is my belief that there's a great deal of time spent manhandling these ballots, mail-in ballots. And they get bundled up and moved around, checked, this, that, and the other. Basically, it takes a day. Then they get handed to this guy over here, and his good people open up the inside ballot, try to begin to flatten it all out, get it to where it can go through David's machines on an orderly basis. So the good ballots that don't have a question on the signatures, so to speak, are delayed. What I'm really saying, and personally I think it's bad process to have the mail-in ballots go to the recorder. The reason they go to the recorder now is because the recorder checks manually every signature. Well, why don't we have them come to the Division of Elections, they open them up, they run the same thing, they scan it once, it's on the list for the recorder, your ballot's been cast. They look at the signature's good. You got a pile over here, the signatures don't look good, they gotta be checked. The ones that don't need to be checked, or that don't need to be checked, get counted. The ones that do need it to be checked, go to the recorder's office to be checked. She's doing it on an exception basis, which is how we do everything else in the county election system. If it's a conditional ballot, she doesn't get the ballot. If it's a provisional ballot, she doesn't get the ballot. If it's one of the 64,731 ballots cast at the election, she doesn't get those ballots.
But we're getting back to, in the question of whether we need one unified department or two, that Jeff discussed earlier.
What was that question? I'm sorry.
Do we-
Bad ears.
The division between the elections department and the recorder's
Yes.
department is something.
Yeah, we
we're
are at that
challenging,
point.
And we're off to, I think we're getting off the topic.
I don't think we're off topic at all. I'm updating this.
The question
The
is,
question was, how does it save time? And that's one way it will save time.
The problem
That's a
is,
significant
this is an argument we need to be making to FN Rodriguez, because she's gonna make decisions about whether or not.
I don't
she
know,
wants
this
to
is
go
the
to an
problem that
automated
it
system.
goes to FN.
Or you
The
need
man right here, he should
Well,
play
it
a part
would
in
be
it.
redundant
Right here.
to allow Brad to
No
check.
authority.
Yeah, you know,
I'm not sure Brad
I'm
would want to
gonna
get
put
into
a helmet on him and send him over.
Brad, when you say you have no authority, where does your authority come from to do something and the recorder does something else?
Within the statutes, it says that the administration of elections, I'm certainly not quoting here, because that's like on the statutes in front of me. At the county level are the responsibility of the boards of supervisors. The boards of supervisors here in this county has designated an elections director, myself and my successors and predecessors, and we are responsible for the administration of elections. I could talk about what that means. What it doesn't mean is the administration of the voter registration file and the administration of early voting, emergency voting, conditional provisional voting, and provisional voting. So,
It's kind of funny when you say it that way.
so I have no interest, other than just as a citizen, I have no interest in the voter registration file. I have no interest in the administration of early voting. I do have an interest in making sure that the early ballots that have been verified by the county recorder are received in a timely fashion, documented, and processed under the statute. That's what I do.
Does the state statute list the responsibility of the county recorder since she's an elected official?
Again, very briefly, it basically says that the county recorder is responsible for the maintenance of the voter registration file and the administration of early voting. Again, I'm paraphrasing.
So it would actually take a change in the law to effectuate any of this.
To have the board of supervisors become responsible for the topic at hand, signature verification of early ballots coming in, yes, that's not the purview of the boards of supervisors.
All that aside,
Herbert,
Brian, go ahead, Brian, go ahead.
Brian?
I think, and trying to get back on topic a little bit as far as the electronic signature verification is concerned, going back to the presentation that FN did make that a number of members of the commission have seen, one of the things that she's identified as problematic, be it electronic signature verification or human signature verification, is the quality of the signature that you're comparing the signature on the affidavit of voting to. And as the Department of Motor Vehicles moves toward signing on an electronic pad with your index finger as opposed to signing on a piece of paper with a pen, the quality of the signature for comparison becomes increasingly degraded. And I think the bigger issue here is not whether we verify signatures manually or whether we verify signatures electronically, but it's the quality of the signature that you're verifying it against. And I don't know how we address that issue unless we want to take on MVD as well.
They have their own rules, Brian.
Their own rules. All that aside, I mean, I don't think there's anything that stops us, if we so decide, that this might be a good thing to look at, of making a recommendation, maybe it goes to the board, I don't know, that's who our bosses are, that we think this is a worthy topic to pursue, put together a case, here's why we think it's this way, here's the result, pursue the idea, because obviously Brady can't go out and buy, even if he had the authority, he's not going to go out and buy signature verification, put in to replace everybody else without testing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But nothing stops us from, if we so agree,
to make a recommendation if this is a worthwhile topic to pursue for the various reasons, make a case. I don't see any problem with that.
If we had a context of specifications for the system that we all agreed upon, then we could talk about these sorts of technical issues.
Well, I think, I would disagree with you because I don't think we have enough people here qualified to look at the technical.
No, what I mean by technical is, what is the goal of the system?
Okay, yeah, exactly.
Right, and I think that's something we can talk about.
That's right.
Would you read?
Yeah. I'm not talking at the higher level that you started,
Yeah, make a case that here's why we think it's a good idea.
right.
First, we have to, I think, define the problem correctly.
Okay.
And I can throw out an idea that nobody's gonna like, I don't either, but one way to speed up the process is to take a statistical sampling of the voter signatures. Not look at every signature, but look at every 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20. So something statistically verified.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But
And how many people in the legislature want to carry that water for?
Robert, would you operate bank that
Maybe
way?
we shouldn't sign.
You're not gonna
all,
verify
but
every
I have-
I'm saying that we have to define the problem, but why is there some delay in reporting the results at the end of a long election? And is this the problem? Is this why we have a long delay? According to FAN, it is not the problem.
It's a part of the problem, and another part of the problem is the extraordinary amount of signatures, mail-in ballots that get delivered to polls on election day.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting bigger and bigger.
And which is getting even bigger and bigger. This would speed that up. So she said that the problem is with provisional ballots. So yeah, the provisional ballots, she gives them 5 days to straighten them out, and they begin to open them up after all the other ballots are cast. This sped up the ballots that are cast. Why wouldn't that help?
I'm just saying that we need to, before we have a solution, we have to really define what is the problem.
And then here's another thought. Okay, maybe we don't want in the elections department to get the ballots. Maybe the vendor who mails the ballots out can scan the ballots when they come back. And
Mail to the vendor?
well, they go to the election department or whatever, but the vendors, they do that, does a Periscript, as I understand it, in Phoenix, for whatever it's worth, does some verification of some of this.
Actually, they got rid of that provision because it was causing too many problems.
Okay?
But you're not talking about outsourcing, are you?
Possibly.
We're still talking about solutions.
Yeah.
What is the real problem?
The real problem is it takes a lot of time with these mail-in ballots to verify the signatures, and the signature authenticity, in my opinion, is not everything it's supposed to be. Keep in mind, let me finish, please. Keep in mind, the notion here is that it's an authentic signature. I couldn't sit there and screw the nut on a Model A coming down the assembly line, and that's essentially what we've got.
But Leroy's comment, I guess, was the quality of the original signature, any place, is so unreliable. How does speeding up the process make it better?
You're going to have to get the database straightened out and do wet signatures, there's no question about it. And that doesn't hurt us at all, because here's the other benefit, and this is our elections department here. Somebody processes all these things that have signature verification, petitions. This will review that well. That's another use of this signature verification. So
We're getting away from the
Yeah,
topic
well,
of how to speed up an election.
that will speed things up.
Not in an election.
But
Barbara,
Yes, Brian?
just a personal observation going back to improving the speed of the election. Having been one of those geeks that got excited when biometrics came for access to medical records and patient care areas, which was my previous life, I thought that was a wonderful thing. And the thing you find out, and it's going to be problematic here as well, you still had to put in an employee number and then hold your thumb or your finger up against the biometric reader to get any kind of improved access. If all you did was put your thumb up there or your finger, whichever biometric you had loaded, and the computer had to search the entire database of fingerprints that were available, it was not only significantly slower, but significantly less accurate. when you're looking at the ballots, in order to be able to electronically verify the signature, you're still going to have to find the original signature and know who you're going to compare it to. So the only thing you're cutting down on here is the actual time that the two signatures are being compared. You still have to be able to look at the envelope that the signature is coming in on and say, this is John Doe, and bring John Doe's screen in or signature into the system so that the comparison can actually occur. I really think there's a perceived benefit here that is more fictional than it is factual.
Well,
That may
They
be,
just-
Let's
We've
just,
got three people all of a sudden who want to talk at the same time. Who hasn't talked for a while?
Bill?
no,
Okay. Okay.
But just, I think Brian is straight on. That's one of the beauties of the banking system, is it distributes the process of verification. So each individual gets a chance to verify for themselves the transaction took place according to their intent. So why can't we take that as a standard for elections or voting? I think those are the sorts of issues we should be talking about as a group, because nobody else is talking about those things. Practically, they're concerned with whether my party gets this or we comply with the state law. Those are not the really big issues that citizens perceive.
Any further discussion? Don't think we've come to any resolution here. Can we move on?
well, let me just suggest one last thing, and then I'll get off the stage and we can close it up and talk about it again. But I sent around a note that said there were 4 people that I could see from just doing a quick search, Google, so to speak. Google wasn't around the last time we looked at a lot of things. Technology with signatures has evolved tremendously, particularly with retina iris views. They use that same technology with the signatures now. It's not just comparing a visual with a visual, it's a whole set of algorithms. I think we should, I noticed on here that the provider of the software and machinery that our own elections department, election systems and software, they were one of the people that came up. Maybe we should get them to give us a presentation on what the benefits are and what the benefits aren't. We're all sitting around the table like we know what the hell we're doing, and we don't.
We may have to eventually get rid of the signature process and use some other process, since we have the problem with electric gas that you write your name on. When I write my name on a credit card signature on a machine, it doesn't look anything like my real signature. And that's a real problem in the.
I mean, how many millennials don't know cursive?
Exactly. So it's a whole bigger problem than just how we process signatures, but how do we verify people?
And I think that in this regard, an old issue in this commission has been, we don't want the companies to define how the system should work. Imagine, we want to tell people what type of system we think ought to exist. They can tell us it's not feasible, or it's too expensive, whatever, but we don't want to invite people to come in who make the systems to tell us how they're going to build them. They should be responding to people in the community who want to have an election have certain attributes.
Have you had this conversation with members of the
Sorry?
legislature? Have you had this conversation with members of the legislature?
Please tell me how we get educated on this process without asking somebody that knows what.
I think it'd be interesting to have somebody come in and talk about the technology. You know,
It ought to be both.
yeah, fine.
It shouldn't be just one-sided.
Both as why as opposed to both.
I'm sorry?
Both, I mean,
Both sides. If somebody comes in and says, these are the plans we have for building election systems for the next 20 years. And a voter might come in and say, since I'm paying for these things, why doesn't it include this? Why doesn't it include that? And they might come back and say, well, that's not feasible, or it's too expensive.
I think we're talking here specifically about the signature.
No, but I mean, there are broader issues.
Well, no, but it's off topic, sorry.
But signature is a question of identifying the voter and identifying a valid vote. It's broader than just the signature.
Let's move on from this and we can repeat it next time.
Yeah.
Good
Well, if I
time.
may, we had election engineering systems this past fall brief us on the security plan. They were willing to do that then. I don't know why we couldn't get them down at the same, and that was our security plan, sir.
But that's not this agenda item. Put that as future agenda item.
No, we're talking about signatures. And I'm suggesting that we get somebody to come talk to us about what it is.
It's how it works.
Okay, let's talk about this as future agenda items. Okay?
Well, I think that John getting at is, can we agree to extend an invitation to somebody? That's on topic here, very much so.
So who would you extend an invitation to?
Are you asking me? You were looking at Artie for a second.
Here,
I would send the people we know and we believe in.
Who do we send?
Election engineering system. We use them as a security source.
Do they have a system verification system that you know?
They do.
Mr. Cote knows more than I do on the subject.
Well, they say they do. You go to their webpage on the stuff I sent out, you can read it. The stuff by Periscripts was a little easier to read, so I sent that around. It was easier to get off the net. But it's the same process, but maybe they got a better mousetrap. Maybe not, I don't know.
Okay. Do everybody want to try to invite them and anybody else? Are there any other systems, points of view?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I will extend the invitation to election systems and software, our current tabulation vendor, and basically ask the question, since I'm ignorant on it, is do they provide signature verification services? Is that what I'm asking them?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Military grade. Voters
I'll
grade.
just let it go to signature verification.
I'm not sure military.
But my, I could be educated here, I don't believe that that's their business, but I could be wrong.
When the federal agency certifies election equipment, do they certify signature verification equipment?
It's strictly tabulation.
Right.
Strictly.
Strict tabulation, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, we are on the leading edge of folks, aside from the ones that do all mail, and we're as close to that as most any other state. There are still states that have very strict laws about absentee/early voting, correct?
Yes.
And that still is the majority of states. I believe.
Probably, although it's shifting.
It is shifting, but it's still the majority.
And the federal standards are voluntary,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
They don't tell anybody what to do. They say you should have a standard, and you should, it should be thought through. So there's no God out there who's going to tell us how to do things. We have to sort of make up our own minds about it.
That's the federal system, federal system.
It is something we should look at. So let's move on.
John, could you try to find out what vendors do this kind of business?
It should have been in a package. Did you not get some
I
stuff?
did, but I'm afraid I didn't read it.
There's a memo from me that says, Mike, memorandum complete with attachments.
Oh, yeah.
Sirs, following is a list. Run back for the guys in Phoenix. Blue Crest, whoever they are. Periscript, I gave you some articles about Periscript. And election systems and software.
Okay.
And that's a partial list at best.
So if election system in fact does this and we invite them, should we invite somebody else?
Yeah.
Sure.
I think if we invite anybody, we should
Yeah.
give them some questions in advance to answer. Otherwise, it's just a marketing trick.
Well, at that point, I think we can make very clear to them that this is an educational presentation. We don't want to hear a sales pitch.
Right.
And we can do it electronically, they don't have to come here physically.
Well, you like a video thing, you mean? We don't have that capability.
Oh, you're talking about the PowerPoint
As
slides?
diverse as the questions have been in this room, I think they should be here to answer.
Sure they-
No, that we have done
We can do
a
that.
Skype session before that, we had some logistics issues.
It was interesting, yeah.
Yeah,
Which I believe is the next topic of conversation.
yeah.
Okay, good segue.
All right. So Brad will look into whether ES&S actually does have this equipment.
Do you have this, Brad?
I probably,
He came from Mike, Dale, it's in Mike's.
okay, I'll look closer at the email, all I have is what's part of the agenda.
Here, take this. Patience.
So to be clear, I am going to reach out to election systems and software. I don't hear that there's a direction to me to do anything other than that.
And others that would be providing signature verification equipment.
Now,
If they
if,
can-
now that, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Now, thank you for this, John.
You're welcome.
It is true that ES&S does provide mail-in ballot support. So they will provide the ability to mail out ballots from their entity. In other words, if you've got ES&S printing your ballots for your jurisdiction and they print them in presumably Omaha, they can mail them out for you from Omaha. But I don't think they do signature verification. But having said that, I will check. But just when it says they support mail-in ballots, it doesn't necessarily mean they're doing
This
signature
just took a
verification.
little while to look up.
Okay.
I had somebody that was a former IBM software guy look to see what was out there.
Okay.
This was the list he came back with. He did not know that ES&S was our current provider for equipment. I will also say to you that there's one group on here, Periscript. When you start looking at their who their scientists are, you'll find out that they're of Russian lineage.
Russian immigrants.
So, but they're well thought of supposedly, and, you know, I suggest maybe they change their name from Igor Turkvinsky to
John
Jack Smith or something, you know, but
So will you check?
We've
these-
pretty much pounded this to
Yeah, I
death.
think we have. Let's move on to county legacy equipment for sure. We're good.
For those of you who may need to be reminded, this is basically getting rid of our current devices that enable a disabled voter at the polls to vote privately and independently. We are continuing to pursue replacing that equipment. The budget for my department, in which this will be a topic that will be for review and discussion with the Board of Supervisors, will be on May the 7th. And so I will basically be talking about my budget package and about this being a variance from what I would come to ask for usually. And it is in the amount of $1.2 million. We were hoping that there was perhaps a cooperative agreement with our current vendor, ES&S. And we do need to go to ES&S so that it is compatible with the system that we currently have. That there was a cooperative agreement that we may be able to just piggyback onto the contract that Pinal County has or Gila County has. No such thing exists, so we're going to be not necessarily working from scratch because it is a vendor that we know of and that we have in a contract for other services. But I would imagine that getting the equipment purchased and delivered in time for the presidential preference election in March of 2020 should not be a problem. I will tell you one other thing, for those of you who are not familiar with it, in Las Vegas, I think every year they have some type of DEF CON election hacking event. And so before we leave, let our TSX equipment go out into the environment and perhaps show up at one of these hacking events. We are totally frying the system on board, so it's going to be totally washed. So you won't be able to hear in the future, oh, we got a machine up in Las Vegas and we found Pima County election results on it. So,
Just one other comment about that, since we're talking about reputations.
excuse me.
In a previous life, I ran a laboratory to test election equipment. And our customer, ES&S, refused to support the idea of testing the source code to make sure it was reliable This is at a time when NASA and leading edge companies elsewhere were doing that as a matter of course. So the moral of the story is you can't rely on these companies packaging products, and that's what they do, they have to do that. You shouldn't rely on them to set the criteria, because they are thinking in terms of their interests about what's good for them and what enables them to run a business. And that's fine. So you need an opposing point of view about what's good for the public and what elections could deliver or should deliver, so that there can be a back and forth discussion of how to actually design and deliver a system. So I think you should be very cautious about saying, oh, these people are going to tell us the truth. Nobody knows the truth. We're going to find out the truth if we have some discussion. If there's no discussion, we're not going to find out the truth.
You're a man of my own heart, by the way. Elections equipment shouldn't tell us what to do. They work, it works for us.
Right.
I can tell a story about that, but yeah.
All right, so
Uh,
anything
just-
else? I
just-
don't think, go ahead.
Just to clarify, that's in next fiscal year's budget, correct?
Correct.
And as we indicated in the previous meeting, we need equipment that produces a ballot that's compatible with our system, and there aren't very many, maybe there are one.
Choice of one.
Okay, update on live streaming.
I did not participate, but apparently in February, I believe, the Board of Supervisors conducted a meeting, and at that meeting, one of the topics was, I'm going to get the name of the commission wrong, the Citizens Law Enforcement Participation Commission. Thank you. At any rate, there was a suggestion that not only Board of Supervisors meetings be live streamed, but all commission members, commission meetings be live streamed. I asked the clerk of the board a couple of weeks ago, was that indeed something that is being explored? The answer was yes, and the communications department is still working on a possible solution, so stand by for further developments.
Yeah, especially since I don't think there's provision here, we'd have to move someplace where
Yep.
we would have the capability for live streaming, like back into the Board of Supervisors.
I would imagine we would have to be closed captioned in some capacity as
Yeah.
well. And all of
I mean,
Will there be advertising?
it sounds like a good
Not a right idea.
No, it sounds like a good idea, and in general, I support it, but
Would those be considered a
I
campaign contribution?
just worry about the technical aspects of it.
So stand by for further developments, but that's all I
I
have.
mean, are we going to have to get up out of our chairs, walk to the camera and say, I am, and then make our comments to the camera instead of to each other?
No, that's not how it works.
Can you
I
imagine?
know, I'm being facetious.
Can you imagine an enormous live audience who would have watching these?
Yeah.
Be a rock star.
Okay, let's move on to procedures manual. I already indicated that under the chairman's report. They are working on it. They do have a draft. I have the impression they've drafted most of it. They are starting to go to elections officials, and then they will go to publishing the draft after the election officials have commented, and then we will have our turn. And there will be a
Is it online
meeting, but
already?
they did not give me a timeline.
And I'm only making this comment because I've tried with previous secretaries of state and it went nowhere. I'm just, hopefully with the new one, it will make some progress. Those of you that are on this commission that are in contact with her, please encourage her to find an editor so that the manual actually is consistent when it uses specific language about. Oh.
Yeah, just various band-aids put on previous manuals.
Please encourage an editor, and I speak as a nonpartisan when I say that.
And I'm hoping that we will have the elections director come down here either at our next meeting or at a special meeting and go into more detail.
We've had many people on this commission participate in the reviews of the manuals in the past, and one of the most frustrating aspects of it is to be ignored. And so that between this review process and the eventual final version, there's a disconnect. And it may be that there should be a final version. It should be a second living document with the ability to keep adding changes so they can adapt over time. And I think, because the burden of any people who come into that office is tremendous. There's a learning curve and there's a tremendous amount of information. So perhaps people should reconsider the idea of having one final elections manual.
Well, they have to have one now.
You can have the latest edition, but the document can be a living document.
That was kind of covered in that one bill that says the Secretary of State shall redo the procedures manual every odd numbered year. So, that does.
And for election law challenges, it is essentially, it is the law. And so there has to be a
Well,
definitive
actually, it's
version.
not the law.
But you get the point.
Yeah, it's not.
It's regulatory law, it's not statutory law.
The law is the law, and the procedures manual has to defer to the law. And occasionally, in past secretaries of state have written sections of that manual that have conflicted with the law.
Do
The
tell.
law No.
But it's the law as far as it is implementing the vagueness in the law, putting it into more specifics.
It's like an administrative code. It shouldn't be, it's something that is treated as an administrative code, and you go to that to look at the procedures for how to do things. But occasionally, people who write things, even lawyers who write administrative codes, screw up.
And then it's interpreted 15 different ways in 15 different counties.
Exactly.
But the final version has to be approved by the
AG.
secretary.
Governor and AG.
Yes.
Do you think, well,
Okay, so stay tuned for further information. Future agenda items,
Well, I'd like to carry over.
right? Anything else, anything new you would like to see? And I will communicate with the recorder and see if she will come and give a presentation to us that she's doing around the county. Is that okay with everybody if I just communicate and ask her, do I have to have the language?
when you say her, do you mean Chris and her
We have
or
to do
Chris?
all our requests.
Somebody
have to
from
go-
her office.
Our requests have to go through her. She does not want us to request anything directly to Chris. So Brian and I will work on that. That's okay with everybody?
I'm fine with it. I think that should be pretty easy and straightforward.
Yeah. And she said she would do so. Anything else as a new agenda item?
Meeting?
Happy Easter.
Next meeting date, May 17th.
Fine with me.
And June 21st.
Yeah.
We can adjust for June 21st.
First day of summer.
I guess today.
Okay, Jeremy?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
To all you members